But really, I think our bodies cannot help to move through to music. And there is sort of this sense of joy and this beautiful term, collective effervescence, of something that, a moment of awe, a moment of being part of something greater and moving almost as a river, as an ocean together. And I think this feeling, and probably it can be related to other forms of gathering or doing things together, but this feeling is the essence, I think, of what I think of if I think of oneliness and interconnectedness.
Hi, I'm Rudy. Welcome to Voices of Emergence, where inner transformation meets systemic regeneration. How do we evolve beyond extractive systems? How do we meet a world in transition with soul, integrity, and imagination? Join us as we reclaim the wisdom of the body, embrace the paradox of being human, and step into a living story of emergence. I'm joined today by my dear friend and co-host Alex de Carvalho. What I like about Alex is he's a systems thinker, global connector, and lifelong explorer of human potential. His journey spans continents and disciplines, always seeking the deeper patterns that shape our world. Together we dive into the emerging stories, questions, and possibilities of a world in transformation. Alex?
Thank you, Rudy, and welcome, Monika. Today we welcome someone whose presence lives in the space between things. Monika Jiang is a cultural facilitator, writer, and community builder whose work orbits the intimate terrain between loneliness and connection. As a second-generation Chinese immigrant raised in Germany, Monika has spent much of her life exploring the spaces between estrangement and belonging, personally, spiritually, and culturally. Through the Oneliness Project, she invites global communities into deeper inquiry, presence, and care. Her journey weaves through Zen teachings, somatic movement, Berlin's club culture, and creative expression, making the body a portal to truth and aliveness. With a background in media, philosophy, and transformative community design, Monika has collaborated with organizations like Google, Porsche, and the House of Beautiful Business, reshaping how we gather, lead, and live. At the center of it all is her devotion to creating spaces where people feel truly seen, heard, and understood.
Thank you so much.
Really looking forward to this and learning about your journey. And my first question to you would be about emergence. When you hear this word emergence, what does it bring up for you?
Emergent, bringing things to the surface that are maybe bubbling in the ether, in the subconscious. So bringing something to the light, to the visible. It also brings up movement in a way. I think there is something in motion. And I also feel emergence very much speaks to a quality, like being with emergence and cultivating to be with emergence. I think is a quality that is needed in today's times that are unpredictable. Yes.
Thank you. Beautiful. Monika, before we dive deeper in your work, can you share a bit more of your story? What were your beliefs when you grew up? How did they change over time? Where did your journey towards the transformation where you are now started? Were there any cathartic or special moments you recall of tremendous insights, or moments that you decided to take action towards becoming more whole? Like, can you give us a brief history on that?
Yes, I grew up with a more traditional mindset, very much coherent with a lot of people who have Asian parents, but grew up in the West, which is speaking to this idea of having to perform and having to meet certain standards that our parents were hoping to see us in terms of career, having a stable life, and so forth, especially because my parents, as many others who grew up similarly like me as Asians in the West, have immigrated here to Europe or to Germany, and therefore have a specific mindset of wanting their children to do better and to do well. While that has helped in a way for me to develop a strong work ethic, which helped me later in life, And on the other hand, it has, I think, limited me in terms of my ways of expressing, and being just who I am, which has always been more of an, I would say, creative, artistic, free-spirited being. So I think that was sort of early on repressed, perhaps. And then that took shape later in life. I would say with the last chapter that I closed with the House of Beautiful Business, where I was part for 5 years, I was able to bring out the creative spirits, the imagination, the ability to think, to feel, to expand my horizon, and not just within my world, but also transcend that to what does this have to do with our systems, our societies, the way that we live, the way that we perceive each other, and also the sufferings, right, that come with that and the challenges. Later then, before I left House of Beautiful Business, which was end of 2023, I definitely had a few points where I just had a strong longing and desire to do something differently and to even follow this intuition more of wanting to be closer to people and their need. I was just asking myself, what is needed right now in this moment? And how can I contribute in a very small way to that need? And that is eventually how I became dedicated to this phenomenon of loneliness and connection and oneliness and everything in between, because I feel that it's a sentiment that can be felt throughout, and it is both personal but also universal and also systemic in a way.
Monika, as I'm what's called a third culture kid. So my father was Brazilian and my mother is from Finland. I was born in Paris. And by the time I was 11, I had lived in 6 cities on 5 continents, and I spoke 5 languages. And so in each place I went to live, not only did I have to learn the new cultures and make new friends, but I felt like an outsider. So I both feel like I don't belong from any single place because of my mixed culture, but every new place I go to, even when it's to one of my nationalities, I feel like I'm a foreigner in those places. I might speak with an accent. And so I think you talk about similar types of things, this, how to navigate between estrangement and belonging, and how do people seek belonging, and yet they feel deeply alone, even when they seek belonging. So I wonder how that plays out for you, the Oneness Project. And as you've become more visible, has anything changed for you?
Yeah, it's so interesting, and you describe it in such a visceral way. I think many of us can relate, even if we have a different cultural background. But I think these days we belong to everything and nothing. It's strange to find a sense of deeper connection because there are so many. Like there's this paradox, I feel, at the time that we live in, where we're so hyper connected. It's more superficial. It's more in the numbers and the quantity, and we lack the depth and perhaps also the language for feeling at home, even in the in-between, or feeling somewhere, belonged, but not fully, not 100%, because we do not fit that certain box. And yet we do feel like we have a right in a way to be there. So I think loneliness these days comes in very different shapes and forms, and it is largely because connection in itself is this tricky experience and term, and can be taken in many different ways, like when do you really feel connected to something or someone or a community or a place, and when not, and how much can you determine that, and how much is it determined by those who are either accepting you or not. I think for me, since I've started this project, I've also equally started a path of reconnecting with my roots. I've traveled to China again, and I will probably again. And I spent some months this year in Asia, in Vietnam, so not in China, but that also weirdly, strangely felt like home. I've spent time learning about Zen Buddhist teachings with Plum Village, with the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and many of the encounters that I've had, the teachings and the ways of seeing the world, which in Eastern philosophy and perspective are so much more about interdependence and impermanence, right? And the idea of wholeness in the sense of the fact that everything is interdependent and interrelated and everything is in relationship. And that's been very resonant with me, having grown up with the Western view of things, which is often much more about linearity and transaction in this modern world overall, I guess. So it's been also a very personal journey of reconnecting or rerouting.
Yeah, Monika, you also mentioned that movement is very important in your work, and also art and presence. So basically using the body as a portal to, deeper transformation. So yeah, I know you mentioned fluent body, Gaga movement, painting, club culture. So I wanted to know, like, what do these creative rituals teach you about belonging and how they connect also to your inner truth and connecting to your inner truth?
Yes, I think I've always been very connected to my body in some ways. I just was very shy and scared, perhaps even to express it or to show it. So that has also been a path to liberate. How can you feel what's inside of you? How can you move your body? How is it not so much about perfecting the choreography? I went to ballet class when I was a child and I love ballet a lot. But ballet is kind of the idea of perfection and discipline and extreme physicality as well. And I've become more and more drawn to more intuitive movements where you follow your body, where it's all about kind of literally dropping into your body and not think so much about, is this right? Is this wrong? Other people are doing it better. They're more beautiful. They're more whatever. And that is helping me because I almost get into a mindful or meditative state. I think a lot as well. So I don't think when I move usually. I just feel very connected with the music or the rhythms. And then to do that together with other people. So I do it both in my gatherings, but also when I go out or go to events. To dance together with other people, I think is one of the most human things that we can do, most natural things that we can do. We can't help it. I always feel like we cannot help it. Even people who don't feel like this is their thing and they're like, no, this is uncomfortable. But really, I think our bodies cannot help to move through to music. And there is sort of this sense of joy and this beautiful term, collective effervescence, of something that, and a moment of awe, a moment of being part of something greater and moving almost as a river, as an ocean together. And I think this feeling, and probably it can be related to other forms of gathering or doing things together, but this feeling is the essence, I think, of what I think of if I think of oneliness and interconnectedness.
That is interesting. Do you feel that this type of movement and connection with body, this embodiment, is also like a feminine, like in the balance between masculine and feminine? Is that more of like a feminine expression, reception, creativity?
Good question. I had never thought about this. So maybe, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. My mind goes immediately, yes, to the feminine because the female body and what is happening in the female body generally, and how we're perhaps in touch with our inner, with our cycles and everything in a different way, just by biology, basically, in that sense. But I'm not sure if I would say that it is something inherently feminine, which doesn't mean that men don't have, of course they would also have, could be in touch with that feminine side of themselves. But I'm thinking in my mind, I'm going to different kinds of movements and I'm like, well, there are so many different ways how you can dance and move. Even if it is intuitive, it doesn't necessarily have to be the way that I move, which is more maybe soft or, which would perhaps in my way of thinking would be more about the feminine ways of doing things. So I'm not sure. Yeah.
I was thinking there might be, for me, what is bringing up is that it might be decolonizing, like you decolonize from moving away from the mind into the heart, into the body, into connection with the earth and nature, feeling. So perhaps a way of decolonizing.
Yeah.
That's what it brought up for me when you were talking.
Beautiful. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it brings up a lot of things, like this whole feminine, masculine type of
Mhm.
things. And I do a lot of work with men. And I have been also sitting in some of your circles online, and I found that your energy is very, very, very feminine. It's very
Mm.
sensitive. It's actually opening up. It's inviting everyone, and it invites actually people to trust each other and to open up to, and to enter a new dimension or a new way of being, actually. So can you explain a bit more about how do you actually create your spaces of community and where people can interact into this new form of being, like, because I think between the masculine and the feminine, when you do a lot of work with just men,
Yeah.
you really feel, and Alex is also doing a lot of work with men, by the way, it's at a certain point you need the feminine again to actually to soften the load of the heaviness that the men are carrying, which is a lot built on guilt and shame and, stories from the past or ancestral, like stories that we carry. And because we have never learned to express them, it's good to do that amongst men where they can learn to express them, but then they also need to learn to communicate about them. And then actually the feminine, I feel, is there to actually invite that again also, So, but I want to hear from you, like, what is your experience with that? And do you feel these paradoxes or polarization sometimes of the masculine and feminine energies, genders or identities and all that?
Thank you for sharing this. It's great to hear from your perspective and the work that you do. For the way that I approach it, if I think about it, I'm like, yeah, it is probably very yin, not very yang. In the way that I'm hoping to invite is first and foremost that even though I am the person who's opening the space and hoping to hold it the best that I can, I'm trying to remove any sense of hierarchy. So I'm saying I'm one of you, which is true. I literally feel like that. It's not just a thing that I'm like, oh, I'm just like you. I'm like, I'm literally like you because I also don't have things figured out. I also still feel lonely sometimes. I am also trying to figure out how to cultivate more meaningful relationships. I've learned a lot of things. It doesn't mean that I perfected. So lowering that and removing the sense of hierarchy or authority almost in a way that I'm hoping to hold the space more from the sidelines or from behind rather than putting myself in the center. So really this idea of a circle and of inviting people hold it together, right? To say like, I'm not just, the expert, but I also want us all to collectively make this experience and hold and fill this space. And then I put some sort of really soft principles, I guess, which help about presence. That I say I'm explicitly saying if you are already here, which is the biggest step already, and now give yourself this gift of being fully here, fully present. And then the second is to say that they're invited to stretch themselves a little bit, to meet themselves a bit closer to the edge of their comfort zone. And at the same time, being mindful of when you overstep that or you feel a lot of resistance, you don't have to push yourself at all. Nobody's going to be forced to share from their personal view if they don't want to. Usually it just happens because people do want to, of course. But with that, there's also a little bit of the pressure going away. And then the third is to hold, I guess, confidentiality and trust the space. And then how I open the space or how I design it is that I go in very small incremental ways of starting with mind and body and really dropping in so that we are all arriving. I always do that, whatever the format is. Even it's just a few minutes of paying attention to your breath, right? It doesn't have to be a whole session, but it's so important to attune, to have a moment of silence and turning inwards. And then I invite to reflect a little bit with themselves, to give a quiet moment in dialogue with yourself, in dialogue with your inner world, because you are also someone you want to have a relationship to, a meaningful one, a healthy one. So starts with that. And then I sort of expand it out to say, now it's one-on-one or smaller groups, then bring it back to the circle. And there's always a sense of play throughout. There will be some movement, something fun for people to enjoy themselves and loosen a bit up. So it's not so much about in their heads, and they get like the body language is like they're sort of becoming smaller and smaller because it becomes heavy. It's like it usually helps to then say, okay, let's shake it off. Let's do something, right? Nature is a big helper, I guess, in that sense. Anything that can be done outside or a break, go outside, sit in the sun for a moment. It really helps. So I am grateful for nature to be there to hold as well a lot. And then any other practices, I guess, not too many. It depends what I do, but then I have a range with more music, movement, or it's more creative expression. So drawing, painting, collaging, doing something with their hands. So many different practices, but like small, I usually try to bring together small parts to see what resonates. And I think that opens a space that can hold the heaviness of some of these topics and the sincerity, and at the same time bring some lightness and some joy and some beauty. Yeah.
You mentioned that we feel, so in the Oneness Project, there's the word oneness or implied oneness. And you mentioned that, you are us, we are you, it's all unity. And that you've spent some time at Plum Village with Thích. How did that affect you? How did the understanding of oneness, what did that teach you about presence and belonging?
Yeah. I learned so much. I think for me, Plum Village is one of the most impressive and powerful examples of what community can be that I've seen. And of course, it is a spiritual community, so there are some advantages, quote unquote advantages, in terms of the frame and sort of the depth and the history of like 2,000 years of wisdom, I guess, that comes with that you can really feel. But there's also, I think, the way that this idea of oneness, oneliness, or in Plum Village or Thich Nhat Hanh's language, it would be interbeing. The idea of nothing exists in isolation, right? We are not separate. That's an illusion. We are inherently interconnected and interdependent, just like nature, right? Everything in nature exists interdependently, some more visibly and some less visibly, but the system is held through relations and relationships. And my time there at Plum Village, I was there now for a week, just last week actually. And then last year for the first time in Thailand. And it has given me language, but more so it has given me practice of how to practice presence, how to practice deep listening with something as small as mindfully eating in silence for a few minutes and really focusing on nourishment in this way, doing one thing right at a time, which is a challenge in this day and age. And to mindfully walk, right? When you're just walking and not scrolling on your phone and texting someone, doing a voice note. I do this all the time. Other ways of really practicing that you're practicing by yourself, but you're practicing together in community. So there is a sense of oneness in where we're moving towards. That has inspired me a lot in this work, but also for my own life of living more peacefully.
Yeah, thank you, Monika. From here, I would like to go a bit to leadership. Like, how do you experience leadership in your networks? I know you're also very well connected to corporate or very diverse networks. For example, in my networks, I really see a lot of examples of female leadership. Like most of the inspiration actually comes from women. Yeah, so that are actually throwing the seeds and inviting the masculine to stand up and move in a different direction. And I'm very grateful also to all these feminine or women that I know in my network that are also doing that work and putting these invitations out there. So, but how do you experience leadership in your networks? Because I know also there's still a lot of, for example, what I see in the world right now is a huge masculine shadow that we haven't been dealing with. now we're going to have to face and we're going to have to deal with it. And I think someone in another podcast, I think it was Giles Hutchins, who said, like, we're going through a huge rites of passage for humanity. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, like most people don't realize it yet. I think we have realized that, and we are preparing the next paradigm shift already, and we're organizing through our communities and interconnection. So, but how do you experience leadership, and also how do you see leadership of the future?
Yeah, I see that and I agree right there. And I think that's been happening for the past years, of course, but more so perhaps it started. I mean, I remember 10 years ago when I did my master's and I wrote actually about the future of work and the future of leadership, and this is how it's going to be. And there were all of these wonderful concepts and ideas that are now starting perhaps to, not even to, but the seeds are starting to come out in terms of thinking more of a equitable way of leading, the idea of not one person having to lead, but more of a shared collective way of leading, right? So not to see the leader, which usually is still in my mind as well, is usually masculine, and this idea of strong authority and direction and that image, but rather now a shift to a different way of leading, as more as guiding, as nurturing, as seeing what is needed. And it's probably not me and my ego and my wisdom, but it's more like enabling, empowering, and perhaps also taking accountability, right, for and responsibility together. So I'm seeing that as well. I'm seeing and I'm meeting a lot of very inspiring people who are maybe also far away from social media and who do not have the platform, who are doing the work, right? Who are in their communities, in their organizations, or in their families, not even in business terms, but in their systems, and who are day by day trying to move slowly towards a direction that will hopefully move us into a more balanced way of being and working at the same time. Because if I look at the workplace and what I hear from people, if I speak with young people as well, there's so much pressure and there's so much exhaustion and so much overwhelm. And I'm like, you're 25 and you already sound like you're burnt out and I need to take you to a retreat now. Like, that's not, I'm deeply concerned. I'm deeply worried. And they are also the people who are, this demographic that feels increasingly lonely. There is a real urgency in a way. And at the same time, I know that this transition is going to take a while and until it sort of, drops into the consciousness of leaders. There has to be a generational shift, and there will be. And that just is time, I guess. And as you say, looking at the world right now with all of these quote unquote strong men leading countries and nations and leading with so much, there's so much violence, unfortunately, as well, right? There's so much violence and pain. And I'm seeing that and still being compassionate. And I don't mean with the single figures there, but with that pain and the reality of that, there is also a lot of ugliness. There is also a lot of despair. And often it gets channeled into not a great way, right? Not the right way, but somehow we have to go through this now. Here we are. And at the same time, seeing these people, as I said, in their communities, in their organizations, who are, yes, women or non-binary people, but also some men for sure that I've met who recognize and who are, you're both, I think, examples of this, who are doing the work and who see it beyond themselves, beyond, me. It's more for the greater good. And what do I want my children, my grandchildren to live in? And what kind of leadership should that look like? Should exist then? So we really seem to be at a moment of, it feels quite stretched and extremely stretched. That's how it feels right now. But it's important also for me, and I think for all of us, to remind ourselves that, there is also a lot of movement and a lot of energy towards something new, something more, perhaps, yes, more feminine or balanced towards nourishment and towards wholeness and oneness. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're touching on something really interesting. There's a deep programming, I think, in us and in me that we always look to an individual charismatic leader to save us. And, usually it's a man, and who's going to be the next man that's going to emerge and save us. But it also feels like you're naming that times are so complex. Like there's a meta crisis with climate change and all kinds of really complex problems. And we're going through so much change right now. For me, it feels like collapse, like institutions are collapsing and there's a whole reconfiguration happening. I'm interested. Thich Nhat Hanh said, I believe, that the next Buddha will not be an individual.
Yes,
The
exactly.
Buddha will be a Sangha.
Yes, yes.
And so how do you understand this idea of not an individual leader, but like a community as a leader? And can that be online communities as well? So not just physical, but online.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I wish he was still alive, so that's good. I mean, many people probably will be like, wish he was still alive so I can meet him and talk but so grateful for everything that he's left, so much wisdom. And there is now the Sangha, right? The community that holds it all. But yeah, so beautifully put. I agree. I think this is hopefully where we're moving toward. And what I think, yes, given the moment that we're in, the overwhelm, the crisis, the pain, the injustices and everything, I think more and more so it's become more important for us to care for ourselves, but not to care for ourselves in isolation, but to care for ourselves in community, in solidarity, in togetherness with one another, that we have spaces, and that's my inherent idea of community as well, where we don't just gather to be cozy and comfortable with one another because we're like, this is my tribe, but beyond that, where we can hold each other and ourselves accountable to look more deeply inwards, but while being connected and while being in relationship with others, while supporting each other, which sometimes it doesn't even have to be like I'm giving you advice, you're giving me advice, but I'm in my looking deeply and you're in your looking deeply. And here we are sitting together next to each other, right? And here we are doing this work, or we're doing this commitment with each other, for each other, and moving forwards. I think I'm, just more and more, not convinced, but I just have this faith in the necessity of coming together in order to do this inner and relational work together. And then it doesn't matter to me where that happens, as in if it's in person or online, it's absolutely possible and necessary. I think we ought to use this type of technology, rather bringing people together over Zoom in a group, coming together, practicing, rather than letting people out there, each of them talking to their AI companion looking for help. Because this is exactly what's happening right now, right? So people are doing that in a quiet corner of their room without anybody knowing or noticing. And I think the flip version of that would be to gather, again, online or in person, and practice community.
Yeah, I actually started a program on that, on like how to do inner work with AI, and where half of the group is actually working with AI or using AI already as a tool for personal growth. And then we look for the blind spots and our own blind spots and all that, but always from the collective intelligence of the circle. So, and it's a very nice experiment. I'm going to open it up in September to a mixed group also. It's really interesting what comes out of it. And the people who are actually not used to work with AI, they are super surprised by what comes out as answers, and also the depth, but also the speed, and one of the reasons that I propose to do the groundwork and the circle is to basically to learn to integrate, because we cannot integrate that speed of intelligence in a normal way or a somatic way. So, we're coming to the end, but I wanted to ask you, what would you whisper to someone standing at the threshold of their aloneness and who's afraid to go in? What would you whisper in his ear?
I think that they're not truly alone, that they're seen, that they're heard, even if it doesn't feel like that right now, and even if they don't recognize it yet, but that we are never truly alone. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you could plant one seed now for the future, what would that seed carry? Yeah, for example, I love this way of how to relate to regeneration of like the seed of an oak tree, carries so much wisdom. Yeah. So, and what are the seeds that we can bring for the future of humanity or also? So what would that seed be for you?
I think it's a seed of care, and care as, because I like care, because I think care is love, of course, but care is an act almost of, saying I care about, me, but about others, about something bigger. And I think with a seed of care, a lot can grow. And there's something innately reciprocal about that, which I love and which I would also understand as a big part of regeneration. Something that is inherently abundant. If it's cultivated and given, I think there is a reciprocity in that.
Yeah, and I think you carry that seed already beautifully with your project, Oneliness Project. Alex, do you have a closing word or more questions?
Well, I think this has been very, very beautiful. So amazing to hear from everything you've shared and your journey. I did have one question at the end here. You're talking about care and empathy is so important. One of our core wounds, some of our core wounds that many people carry, almost everyone, is of abandonment and rejection, and there's this feeling of loneliness. What are some avenues towards healing these wounds? It feels like we're diving back into this. So important.
No, it's a beautiful question, an important one. And for me, I can speak about myself only, right? I think for me, it has been to care for myself better, more kindly. I still learn that almost every day. And I've always thought I have to find it in other people. I always thought I need to be more of service, or I need to give more into my relationships, right? Because so that they don't abandon me, so that I don't become rejected, or that I don't make myself rejectable. But actually, it's, at least for me, it is about cultivating a healthier and kinder and more compassionate relationship with myself, right? To write yourself a love letter. And even if a letter is too much, then it can be just a postcard. To cultivate that and to see where you drive joy from, and what is it, something that you really love to do, and how does it feel to be alive for yourself, and how can you move closer to that, because then you will experience yourself also in a more loving way, right? And then it won't be so painful anymore, perhaps, to seek something outside of yourself that you're really trying to fill inside of yourself. So that's what I've learned so far.
That's beautifully expressed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monika. And what's next for you? What are your plans, or do you have any projects or what you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, I'm continuing this work. I'm hosting gatherings, and I will keep exploring, I think, and learning. I think the next step for me will be to somehow start writing a book and bring my writings and my findings into a body of work. I think the process of writing in itself is quite exciting and daunting to me. So I think that'll be something. And I'm thinking about starting a podcast as well, to give loneliness as a theme, more of a broader space where other people like yourselves might come in to expand a bit and to help together destigmatize the topic and humanize it together.
Thank you, Monika, for joining your time here with us and sharing your wisdom and your lovely, beautiful energy. I wish you well with the Oneliness Project. For the people who don't know, it's oneliness.com. And also her newsletter is on oneliness.substack.com. We're going to keep following you, of course. And I think there's a lot of space and a lot of necessity for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Those are all the taboos that we haven't dealt with or we haven't been able to speak about, and that needs a lot of care. So thank you for your work, and hope to see you soon in one of our circles and communities.
Thank you so much.